There is a strange moment that happens in almost everyone's life where confidence quietly turns into certainty, and certainty slowly begins to feel like intelligence, even when nothing has actually been questioned deeply enough to justify that belief. At some point, without realizing it, many people stop trying to understand things fully, and instead begin to protect what they already believe, which creates a version of intelligence that feels solid on the surface, but is fragile underneath. Because real intelligence is not just about knowing things. It is about how you think, how you question, how you handle being wrong, and how willing you are to step outside of your own perspective when it no longer holds up. So instead of looking at intelligence as something you either have or do not have, it becomes more useful to recognize the behaviors that quietly signal when confidence has replaced curiosity, and when thinking has been replaced by assumption. In this video, we're going to explore 7 signs that you might not be as smart as you think you are. And make sure you stay till the end, because the 6th sign is the most important, and it's one of the clearest indicators most people completely miss. Sign number 1. You feel the need to be right more than the need to understand. One of the clearest signs that intelligence has been replaced by ego is when being right becomes more important than actually understanding what is true, which shifts the focus from learning to defending. In conversations, this often shows up as a subtle resistance to opposing ideas, where, instead of exploring a different perspective with curiosity, the mind immediately looks for ways to challenge, dismiss, or counter it. The goal is no longer to expand your understanding, but to maintain your position, which creates a closed loop where new information is filtered through what you already believe rather than evaluated on its own merit. Over time, this habit makes learning slower, not faster, because growth requires the ability to sit with uncertainty, question your assumptions, and accept that being wrong is part of thinking clearly. Sign number 2. You dismiss what you don't immediately understand. Another pattern that often goes unnoticed is the tendency to quickly dismiss ideas, concepts, or perspectives that do not make sense right away, assuming they lack value simply because they are not instantly clear. This creates a situation where complexity is mistaken for confusion, and unfamiliar ideas are rejected before they are fully explored, which limits exposure to new ways of thinking that require time and effort to process. True intelligence often involves sitting with ideas that feel incomplete or unclear at first, allowing them to unfold gradually instead of forcing immediate conclusions based on partial understanding. But when the mind prioritizes quick judgment over patient exploration, it narrows its own capacity to learn, because anything that requires deeper thinking is filtered out too early. This does not feel like a limitation in the moment, because it creates a sense of clarity and decisiveness, but over time it reduces the depth of understanding that can be developed. Sign number 3. You confuse confidence with knowledge. Confidence can be persuasive, both to others and to yourself, which makes it easy to assume that speaking with certainty reflects a deeper level of understanding than it actually does. When someone expresses ideas clearly and assertively, it often feels like they know what they are talking about, even if their knowledge is limited or based on incomplete information. This becomes a problem when confidence is used as a substitute for evidence, where the strength of delivery replaces the need for deeper analysis, verification, or critical thinking. Over time, this pattern builds a foundation of assumptions that feel stable, but have not been tested, making it harder to recognize gaps in knowledge because confidence continues to reinforce itself. Sign number 4. You rarely change your mind, even when presented with new information. Changing your mind is often uncomfortable because it requires letting go of a position you once believed in, which can feel like admitting that your previous understanding was incomplete or incorrect. But this discomfort is also a necessary part of intellectual growth, because new information constantly reshapes what is known, and adapting to that information is what allows thinking to evolve. When someone rarely changes their mind, it often signals that they are more attached to consistency than accuracy, preferring to maintain their existing beliefs rather than adjust them in response to new evidence. And while consistency can feel like strength, true intelligence often requires the opposite, which is the willingness to update your thinking when reality no longer aligns with your previous assumptions. Sign number 5. You focus on winning arguments. Instead of exploring ideas, in many conversations, especially debates, it is easy to shift into a mindset where the goal becomes winning rather than understanding, which changes how information is used and processed. Instead of listening to fully understand the other person's perspective, the mind starts preparing responses, looking for weaknesses in their argument, and structuring points that reinforce your own position. This approach can make someone appear sharp or quick thinking, but it often comes at the cost of depth because the focus is on performance rather than genuine exploration of the topic. Over time, this habit limits intellectual growth because learning requires openness, not just skill in constructing arguments that sound convincing. Sign number 6. You surround yourself with people who agree with you. The environment you are in plays a significant role in how your thinking develops, because exposure to different perspectives challenges assumptions and expands understanding in ways that isolation cannot. When most of the people around you share similar views, beliefs, and ways of thinking, it creates a sense of validation that feels like confirmation, even if those ideas have not been critically examined. This can make your perspective feel stronger than it actually is, because it is rarely questioned, which reduces the need to defend, refine, or rethink it in meaningful ways. Over time, this creates an echo chamber where ideas are reinforced rather than tested, making it harder to recognize weaknesses or gaps in understanding, because they are never fully exposed. Sign number 7. You avoid situations that expose what you don't know. Perhaps the most limiting pattern of all is the tendency to avoid situations where your knowledge might be tested, or where gaps in your understanding might become visible, because those moments can feel uncomfortable or even threatening. This can show up as avoiding difficult conversations, staying within familiar topics, or hesitating to engage in environments where you might not feel as confident or informed as you usually do. While this avoidance protects your sense of competence in the short term, it prevents growth in the long term, because learning happens most effectively at the edge of what you currently understand. And over time, this creates a gap between perceived intelligence and actual understanding, because confidence continues to grow while learning gradually slows down. The idea of intelligence is often misunderstood as something fixed, something you either have or do not have, but in reality, it is much more dynamic and closely tied to how you think rather than what you know. It is reflected in your ability to question yourself, to remain open to new ideas, to sit with uncertainty, and to adjust your perspective when new information challenges your existing beliefs. Because the most intelligent people are not the ones who believe they have all the answers, but the ones who remain aware of how much they still do not know, and who continue to explore, question, and refine their thinking over time. And perhaps the most important shift is realizing that intelligence is not about protecting what you already believe, but about being willing to let it change when something more accurate, more complete, or more true comes into view. And sometimes, it's not about intelligence, it's about how you see yourself. And the truth is, people who doubt themselves the most are often the ones who are the hardest on themselves. If you want to understand that side of you, watch this video next. It might explain more than you expect.